Hi, and thanks so much for joining today's webinar. This is part of a 4-webinar series on assessment in a competency-based educational system. This is actually the second in that 4-part series, and I'll navigate and orient you on where we are in that overall series in just a moment. My name is Sean Duncan, and I'm the Strategic Change Officer for the Center for Competency-Based Education, or CCBE. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. And here at CCBE, we provide comprehensive support to schools and districts in making a shift from a traditional approach to K-12 education to a more standards-based or competency-based or standards referenced approach. So this includes a lot of components, but they are all foundational to the shift to competency-based education and include pedagogical supports like around assessment, proficiency scales, instruction, and now teacher observation, feedback, and teacher development. This also includes resources and technology solutions where appropriate. So in my role for CCBE, I really work directly with schools and districts and try to get a really solid understanding of what their needs are and determine how we can best support them in making that shift that they're looking to make in those initiatives. So before I introduce today's presenters, I would like to cover a few logistical items. First of all, please follow us on social media. We make a lot of announcements about events like this webinar, about conferences that we're hosting and where we'll be participating. So you can join us on Twitter at Center for CBE, Facebook, Center for Competency-Based Education, and then our website is centerforcbe.com. So a bit about the structure for today's webinar. We have recorded the content and are going to play that back. However, in the background, as we're doing that playback, we are actively monitoring live questions that you submit via the Q&A. We will address those questions live. That'll be Dr. Marzano, Rebecca Martin, Matt Shea, and myself. So we'll come back on after the playback is completed, and we'll address those questions live. So in addition to the Q&A, feel free to use the chat feature here in the Zoom window to enhance the conversation. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So as I mentioned, this is part of a 4-webinar series. We are in the second one. The first one was on obtrusive assessment. This webinar today is focused on unobtrusive assessment, as you see highlighted there. And then the other 2 are on student-centered assessment as well as calculating current summative scores. So please join us for all of those. With that said, I'd like to introduce the 3 presenters for today. So Dr. Marzano is the co-founder and chief academic officer of Marzano Resources. He is the founder of the Marzano Academies. He is the chief academic officer here at the Center for Competency-Based Education. And then overall, during his 53 years in education, he's worked with educators as a speaker, a trainer, and a consultant. He's authored many books and articles on topics like assessment, instruction, writing and implementing proficiency scales, which is the focus of a whole nother series that we recorded and you can find on our website under free resources. And then obviously Dr. Marzano is focused on competency-based education all the way back to 1992. So that marks 30 years at the point that we're recording this webinar. So and that just names a few of the topics. So welcome, Dr. Marzano. Rebecca Martin is a 29-year veteran educator and a client service representative here at CCBE. She has served as a classroom teacher, an instructional coach, a middle school principal, and most recently as Director of Curriculum Personalization in Shelby County Public Schools in Kentucky. So there, as a district leader, Rebecca led the curriculum design and implementation of assessment practices needed to support deeper competency-based education. So welcome, Rebecca. And then finally, Matt Shea is the Executive Director of Client Services here at CCBE. He is a former teacher, curriculum director, and district administrator in a competency-based district in Maine. So with that background, he's skilled in leading the shift from a traditional system to a competency-based system in multiple roles as a teacher and an administrator. And he supports CCBE clients in that capacity. So welcome, Matt. And with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Marzano, Rebecca Martin, and Matt Shea.
So today we're going to be talking about the nature of unobtrusive assessments and understanding strategies of using those unobtrusive assessments. So let's start with the question, what are unobtrusive assessments? Unobtrusive assessments blend in with just regular classroom activities and instructional practices.
Can I add to that a little bit, Rebecca?
You absolutely can.
Yeah, they're actually, the term unobtrusive assessment has been in the assessment literature for decades. No kidding, just that we don't use it very much. It's important to realize you don't have to use unobtrusive assessments. It can be just fine. Matter of fact, you might even think of unobtrusive assessments as just kind of a bonus. They're, oh, I can't think of the right term. If they come up, use them. In other words, if you happen to see an occasion where you are receiving information about what a student knows on a particular topic, and want to score that student, do it. So it's really, like I say, it's a bonus. Use it. It's there for you. And I think once teachers get used to it, they say, oh my gosh, yeah, when we're having this type of discussion or when I use this type of technology, that's an opportunity to actually score some students if I see information that would lead to a valid score for them on a particular topic or measurement topic.
Yeah, exactly. And you set me up perfectly for the next slides.
Good.
So next couple of slides. So the nature of unobtrusive assessments talks really about when you use those effectively with proficiency scales. You empower students. You see students becoming able to use feedback from teachers' observations or unobtrusive assessments to draw conclusions about their own learning. And then they begin to discuss their results of those assessments with the teacher and understand how they connect into their proficiency scales if you're using proficiency scales. And when you think about unobtrusive assessments, there are a variety of practices: observations, response boards, voting techniques, and even confidence ratings can all be used as unobtrusive assessments, ways to gather data about student learning.
Now, for the most part, teachers use these as instructional strategies, which is great. And you might be doing this, and the information you get from students doesn't lend itself to assigning scores. Well, then don't assign scores. But it's really when you see an occasion like, oh my gosh, the feedback I'm getting from students, that tells me that's information that a particular, and you don't score every student either. You just might score a single student. So like it's kind of serendipitous. The information's there, about a particular student on a particular topic, score it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right, so let's talk a little bit about observations. Observations are just meaningful opportunities to engage with kids when they're actually in the work, and then document that way to communicate, indicate to you their level of understanding as well as to them, and give them feedback. When I was in the classroom, I was an elementary person. We used to call it anecdotal notes. I would observe kids all day long, and we would write anecdotal notes, and everybody has a system. On the slide, you see a couple of images of different charts and ways people might record observations, but it's really about watching kids, talking with kids, and finding out what they know. And if you're using proficiency scales, relating it to a level on that proficiency scale or the proficiency scale topic.
I've actually seen teachers, they always have a form like that at their desk. It's not a hard and fast rule. They have to fill it out every class period. It's just there, you know. And like I say, if the opportunity comes up, they say, Bob's response there, boy, that tells me he's at a 2.0 on this particular topic. Just if it's there, record it.
Yeah. In the days before technology, I packed around a clipboard, notebook, and recorded notes all day long. So, all right. Next, we talk about then the role of whiteboards, response boards, or other interactive medias that kids can quickly respond to questions that you ask. So if you talk about whiteboards, every kid in classroom can have just a small whiteboard, and you can ask simple questions that kids can respond to with an answer, and then ask them to show you their answer. Or you can do color-coded cards. There's a variety of ways you can do this to gather quick data on students learning what they're showing you. When you look at those response cards or whiteboards, you look for different ways kids are responding. You might look for right answers, but you also might look, are they using keywords in their answers? Do they have missing information? There are ways you can ask the questions to gather all of that information, from missing information to keywords to justifications, all different ways for you to think about types of information you can gather really quickly from those types of devices. My strength in this when I was in the classroom was a whiteboard with math. And I learned to begin to also eventually use it in other content areas, sometimes with vocabulary or activities that we were just practicing and trying to grow.
I'm old enough to remember the iteration of all this stuff. So I remember when the first voting devices came out, and that was like, no kidding, people were just amazed, that you could ask a question and students could be asked to respond. But what soon became apparent is the only type of responses you could get were kind of selected response questions, because the voting techniques only allowed for, yes, no, I agree to, or A, B, C, D, they picked the right answer. And then the non-tech version was the whiteboards. And again, that was a massive breakthrough. And there's so many nice things about them that, one being, you can use them in such a way that only the teacher sees the responses. That students write, you say, okay, on the count of 3, hold them up above your head. Now I'm the teacher, I can see it, but nobody else. Now looking at their responses, again, you might see for particular students, you might notice that, wow, that great answer right there. And you get away from that, A, B, C, D or true, false type of thing.
All right. One concern I hear teachers often say about using this type of unobtrusive assessment, though, is that kids could be guessing. And so when you think about using whiteboards or response boards or that's easy for you to say, technological tools that kids can, quote, guess, you have to begin to think about that. And some points in that are, not every answer is one that you would want to include in your evidence. You have to think strategically, and you want to use those trends. So if you're asking questions over a couple of days or multiple times during the class, what are the trend that a student or multiple students or the whole class is showing you? And then think about what those trends you're seeing from that individual student or collection of students is showing you, and how you can best use that as evidence of learning and make your next move instructionally and record that evidence as you see it's needed.
Rebecca, I think that's a really good point that you made there, is that you want to identify those trends for those specific kids that you're gathering evidence on. But as we said at the beginning, you don't need to gather evidence and put scores in for every single kid. If they're not showing you something, or if you can't quite identify that you're sure that they know that part of a scale, then you're just not collecting evidence for those kids. And that's totally fine. Everything you've talked about so far is just another instructional strategy that teachers use all the time. So if we can just expand that a little bit to gather more information against scales, so we know where kids are and be able to, credit them, for lack of a better term, for things that they're showing us. We're doing that anyway. When we're looking at their scores or the whiteboards that you're holding up, we're adjusting our instruction in response to what they know. We're just kind of formalizing that now by gathering that information and putting a score in for them so we can see those overall trends over time. So I think exactly what you're saying here is like, the teachers have some great questions here about, do I need to score every single answer that a kid holds up for the whiteboard example? Because that sounds like a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the answer is, yeah, it is a lot of time. So you don't want to do that. That doesn't make sense to anybody. But looking for trends, as you just said, that's a great way to see, okay, which kids do you know it, and which kids aren't you sure? So score the ones that you know and don't score the ones that they don't know. And you're always gathering more evidence.
I once heard an educator refer to unobtrusive assessments as opportunistic assessments.
Mhm. I
You
like
know, if I thought that's kind of a cool name. It was in the context. They were this person. He was in Florida, and he was talking about that alligators are opportunistic eaters. In other words, they don't hunt, but if lunch walks by, they'll eat it. Well, it's kind of like that, if it's there, if the information is there, oh, great, let me use it, and I record it. And so it's a nice way of kind of seeing how this fits into the bigger picture.
So I think the point of that, what I just got out of that, Bob, was don't walk by alligators because they might be hungry.
Yeah, there you go. That
Okay.
was a much more useful point, by the way.
Useful point. But I also classified myself as an opportunist eater, just for the record. During the
If lunch walks by, I got it.
I like it. Yeah, I like it. I get it.
All right. So moving on, and a little bit more on this slide. But just to summarize kind of what we talked about was that this is really a quick assessment for teachers to use to analyze. Little time is needed for you to analyze each response. They're quick questions, so you can quickly pick out what they're doing and what you're seeing without a lot of reading on the board, words, letters, and then several strategies to then implement doing that. And that trend use really takes out that guessing element that we sometimes worry about students doing when you're using these types of strategies. So let's talk about another strategy, voting techniques. And voting techniques we use all the time. Simple, hands up, down, thumbs up, thumbs down, moving with your feet, Likert scales, how confident are you? Going to corners to vote on which answer you think is the best answer, and having kids move around the room and making those, again, observations of what students are doing in the middle of that activity. And it may be a situation where you're not intentionally gathering data on every member of the class, but you have a couple that you're noticing some patterns with as how they vote and move around, and you want to make note of that and use that as evidence.
I'll give you an example with voting with your feet, and a classic way of doing that is that you do pose a question that has a A, B, C, D answer, and instead of having them write A, B, C, D, they go to a corner of the room. If you think it's A, go over here, B over here. And so far, you can't use that for scoring students at all. But a way you can use it is you have students from each group justify why they think that is the answer. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm the teacher and I've got the form that you showed in a previous slide, and Bobby happens to give a really good defense of the right answer, that you just make a little note of that. So again, it's just opportunistic. It's like, oh my, there's some data that really tells me. And the cue typically is the teacher has an aha about a particular student and says, oh my gosh, that's a great answer. And they just record it.
Yeah. And just a few images to remind you over there. Kahoot is a technology-based tool app that you can use to ask those questions and have kids vote. There are several others out there, and I know you can name them. Another thing is confidence rating. This really helps you understand where students, how they feel about their learning. It is really a self-assessment, students determining their own level of proficiency and understanding is a metacognitive skill that students really need to learn, and it helps move their learning forward. So those are easy to use. You can combine confidence rating with voting techniques almost in a way, but it's really about hand signals, again, polling technology, color-coded cards, tokens, self-check assessment, exit slips, tools such as Poll Everywhere, just to have kids share how confident they are in their learning as they move forward. And sometimes you learn as a teacher, you think some kids are really extremely confident in what they know based on what they're giving you in class, but when they self-assess how confident they are, they may indicate they still have some questions. And that's very nice to find out as a teacher and be able to dig into that with students a little more.
Yeah, I think that's the information with the confidence ratings. I think that's part of their main value. You really, students tend to, I believe, students tend to answer these really, honestly.
Yep.
So they don't feel, intimidated to say, I'm not that confident. And that's, so you can pretty much trust what they say. Now, if you add explanation again, say, well, hey, Bobby, tell me about this. What do you think that the answer is? And why are you not confident about that? I might use what Bobby says, as information that now I translate to a score because it was, piece of information I didn't have before, and it seems real clear.
Yeah, a lot of these strategies that we talk about really happen just intentionally planned in the classroom on a daily basis, but sometimes just based on interactions. As a teacher, you think about a question you need to ask students in a way they can respond, and it quickly gives you the data that you need to know about a student learning. Or if you're lining up and you're having kids, I'm thinking about a kindergarten teacher that I know and have observed that, when she's a master at having her kids line up and pattern count or skip count, and she's walking by listening to students and thinking about how is she using that data to see how well certain students are doing. And that is really the nature of unobtrusive assessments. It's everything you're doing in your classroom to engage students and move their learning forward. But then you can actually use those same strategies as assessment tools and gather that evidence and look at where their learning lies on that proficiency scale that you might be using to plan your instruction. And that is the nature of unobtrusive assessments and several different strategies that you can use in your classrooms.
Let me just again remind everybody, unobtrusive assessment is a type of assessment, that is also used with your traditional obtrusive assessments, and if you look at our session on that, you see there's a whole bunch of techniques there. It's used with unobtrusive assessment is also used in conjunction with student-centered assessment, and now it's a third type. You put that all together, and a classroom teacher has a wide variety, of ways of gathering information about students' level of knowledge on a particular topic vis-a-vis a proficiency scale. So see it in the bigger context, and you put all those together and you've got a lot of ways, to gather information about students' status.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. If you have any further questions, just reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer them.
Hi, and thanks so much for joining today's webinar. All right, thanks so much. We have received some questions via the Q&A button. If you have not yet had an opportunity to submit any questions, just know that we are monitoring that Q&A, like we said in the beginning of the session today. And if there's anything that comes to mind, even during this live session, that you think of a follow-up question to something we've addressed, submit it there. We're, like I said, checking those live. So we did receive some questions. Let me go ahead and address those. First one is, Let me just pull up my chat thing in the background here. All right. Can you explain what proficiency scales are? Sounds like this work, and I think they mean unobtrusive assessment, what we were presenting today, is based on them, and I want to be sure I know what they are.
Sure. Let me pull one up for you so we can take a look at it. And I'll pull up a generic version of one right now. So when we're looking at this, this is our generic scale with half points here. And what we're looking at is that the score 3.0 is our target for our kids. It's where they've mastered or proficient or whatever your language is. That is the target for kids. We call that the more complex learning goal. And our score 2.0 is usually our simpler learning goal or our foundational level material for those. And then we've got some half points in between. Rebecca, do you want to like speak to any of those or Dr. Marzano?
But
Or
I
just
mean, I do.
them.
So the importance to the 2.0 and the 3.0 is really that's where your learning lives, is how I like to put it. That's where you're really thinking about what the kids need to know, and the intended outcome, with 4.0 being the transference. The half points become really important in this work, because that's where kids grow. Kids want to see their progression of learning, and it helps you see their progression of learning. So those half points allow for that learning where you're saying, well, you have the 2.0, but we haven't, quite gotten to the independent level of the 3.0. And so you're really at a 2.5, versus the opposite of that would be you just live at a 2.0 for a really long time, or however long needed, until you get to the 3.0 learning. So it really does help show, the scale helps show the learner and the teacher a progression of learning.
I would just recommend to the question asker, just take a look on our website, look at the 3 webinars we did on proficiency scales, and we should have entitled it "More Than You Ever Wanted to Know About Proficiency Scales," because we go into great depth.
Yeah, that
Okay.
sounds good. All right, perfect. Let's move on. So our next question is actually also related to proficiency scale. So next question is, how would a teacher use a proficiency scale to give specific feedback to a student while using unobtrusive assessments?
Can we put one up there that actually has the content in it?
We sure can.
Yeah, that's actually from our LMS, the learning management system that has these built in. But I can't read that. So Matt, who is younger and wiser, can explain how a teacher might provide the feedback and reference the proficiency scale. It makes the feedback very, very specific and very, very concrete.
It's a good thing I have my contacts and my reading glasses on. So when we're talking about giving feedback to a kid, we can look at let's say they're working on the foundational level material. And some of these steps that kids are working on in this math problem they can explain that the inequality symbol must be reversed when multiplying or dividing, solving multi-step inequalities, identifying numerical relationships, that sort of foundational level material. And what we can do when we're gathering feedback from these kids is ask specific questions about pieces of the scale, about what they know, and you can further that using those probing discussions that we've talked about in some earlier webinars. We can do that at any level of the particular scale, depending on where they are in the scale, whether it's at the foundational level of the 2s or the complex levels of the 3s. Rebecca, do you want to add things to that?
Well, and I think the inverse of that also, if you're using scales with students should have those skills in their hand.
Yeah.
So as you're seeing them work on something, can they identify what learning they're working on and their success rate with that, and having that conversation with them? So kind of both of those ways are good strategies.
Agreed.
Good. And actually, if I can just, so Bob just addressed it, but if I'm going to take the screen sharing here, Matt.
Oh, yep.
If I can just do a quick shameless plug for the free content that we already have out there. If you go to our website, centerforcbe.com, I'm going to tell you exactly where to go to get all of these videos, including the recording for today. That'll be up shortly. But I'm on our website right now. Go to free resources, go down to webinars, and you will see that last week's webinar, which was on obtrusive assessment, is already up there. Today's will be updated with the recording from today. You can register for the next two there. And if you scroll down a little bit further, Dr. Marzano mentioned a webinar series that we did on proficiency scales. That's contained right below those. So those are all free out there and accessible. So that was a 3-part series that we did. So shameless plug on that. But now you have easy access to those resources. So next question. Is it okay if students have different amounts of recorded scores, i.e. one student has 3 scores and another student has 5 scores for the same standard?
Can I jump in or do that one? I'm an opportunistic question answer. So if a question that whose answer I know walks by, I'm going to answer it. This is why I'm usually very quiet during this part. The answer is absolutely yes. Matter of fact, it should be that. We loosely use the phrase that the more sure you are of the student status, the less evidence you have to have. The less sure you are, the more evidence you have to have. And so, I mean, literally, you might have one student that over a unit instruction or over a grading period, you have only 3 pieces of evidence on a particular measurement topic. And another student, you've collected, 8 pieces of evidence. And just to be concrete about what means sure or not, usually the pattern of student scores tells you whether you need more scores. If you see a clear kind of linear progression, they were at the 2 and then they went to a 2.5 and the next evidence, maybe not to a 2, up to a 3 and 3.5, you see them going up and say, okay, this makes sense. But if you see a 2 and then a 3 and then a 1 and then a 4, because every time you enter evidence, it's just for that particular moment that you're that particular event that you're scoring, that tells you something's off. There's no clear pattern here. So that was the long answer. The short answer is yes, it's fine to have more and less scores for different students.
All right. Next question. Would I need to score all things like the confidence ratings? Do I put all those in the grade book?
I think the answer to that is no. I think you decide when it's a piece of evidence that's worthy of recording. And to the question previous that Dr. Marzano just answered is really about what evidence do you need for a student? If you're worried about a student's progress, you might want to record more frequency to see what the trend of learning, because it's really about building an evidence of their learning. It's a body of evidence. So you wouldn't need every piece in there. It just really depends on the individual student and what's going on, or your class of students and what's going on inside there. Matt or Dr. Marzano, anything?
No, all good.
That was right on. Yeah, thank you, Rebecca.
Good. Well, that is all of the questions that we have for today. So let me just share screen real quickly before we hop off here. And I just wanted to kind of quickly recap and give you a sense for where we're headed next with these webinars. So first of all, my contact info is right there. On whether it's around assessment in a competency-based educational system or proficiency scales or learning management or instruction in CBE. These are all areas that the Center for Competency-Based Education, those of us here, can help with. So we engage directly with schools and districts in that work. So we'd be honored to learn more about what your goals are and try to help you achieve those. So coming up with the rest of the series. So as I mentioned earlier, this was the second of a 4-part series. I will leave this up here for just a second, but October 3rd is our next webinar. That's going to focus on student-centered assessment. And then our last one will be on October 11th. And that one will just bring this full circle, and we'll cover generating current summative scores. As you might imagine, as we generate all of these scores through all of these three types of assessment and build a body of evidence, we need to figure out how do we generate those summative scores that come as a result of all that good work. So we'll be covering those. So register on our website for those. And with that, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.